We're going to go through building product roadmaps. Most specifically, or more specifically, I should say, we're going to go through how to go from essentially a list of features and basically a backlog of things all the way to a product roadmap, but not just any product roadmap. I want to go through creating an outcome-orientated roadmap that's backed by strategy. In fact, I'm going to take you through the exact process that I went through as a 2-hour coaching session with somebody who I've been coaching, part of the product mentorship, and we did exactly that. So we're going to go through real example, step by step. I will walk you through it. Before we do that, I'm going to spend just 2 minutes talking about product roadmaps, because some of the things that you'll see in that final roadmap that we get to, it's going to have things in it that maybe you've never seen before. It might be very new to you in terms of having them inside of a roadmap. So I just want to just frame a little bit about why that's so important and why we want to think about roadmaps in that way. On that point, let's talk about roadmaps really, really quickly. I'm not going to go super deep into this. I actually did a webinar last year. It's one of my most popular webinars, one of my top videos as well. I go through essentially building product roadmaps. I go through this topic deeper. I talk about like elements of product roadmaps, everything like that. Really good 40-minute video. But what I just want to talk about is what this meme is about. So I want to talk about the difference between roadmaps and plans, just really, really quickly. So this is important because a lot of the times when you see roadmaps, they are actually kind of plans in disguise. And the reason why that occurs is because we do what I often see, which is we have this backlog, or we have this like laundry list of things that we need to do. And then we throw like, some prioritization formula against it, like RICE or like weighted shorted job first or something like that. And then we just stack rank them. And then we take that stack rank and then we just basically, sequence it along some type of timeline. And that is most roadmaps that I see. And as a result of that, most of them aren't roadmaps at all. They're actually kind of plans. And a plan and a roadmap are two different things. And what I want to help you create is a roadmap and not a plan. So let's talk quickly about that. So plans tend to be, so starting on this right-hand side, plans tend to be much more lower in detail. They tend to be more output orientated. In other words, they tend to be more focused on things like, what are we producing? Like the delivery date, right? Like, so that's like the when piece of the puzzle too. It's more focused on like when something's going to be done by. It often also is things like, do design, do discovery, then do build, and then do test, and then do release. It's kind of like a series of activities. And those activities aren't useful from a customer perspective. Like a customer doesn't care about design versus delivery versus release, right? They care about what that thing is and what are we trying to deliver. So as a result of all of that, plans tend to be more internal. They're more of an internal tool. They're for us. They're for us to plan, for us to work out dependencies, to work out, sequencing, right? We're trying to work out when something's going to be done so then another team that's dependent on it can start their piece of work. And as a result of that, we're also focused on things like the how. And ultimately, it's a planning tool. And what tends to be a shorter time horizon. I also threw static in here. Not that plans are static. We know that plans change. We just don't like it when plans change because there's a knock-on effect, right? If we've basically stacked a bunch of dependencies up together, then if something moves, there's a knock-on effect around that. A roadmap, on the other hand, is very different. It's much more outcome-orientated, or at least it should be. It should be something that you could make external. And by the way, plenty of companies have external public roadmaps. I wrote a blog about it too, but you can look it up. And I'm sure you can think of companies that have a public roadmap. And this is because a roadmap, if it's focused more on the what and focused more on the why, and it's more outcome orientated, then it's something that makes sense to our customers. We should be able to put it in front of our customers. It should make sense to them. They should see these problems to solve and these features, and those things should make sense to them. As a result of that, we can't go too low level with it, because if we go too low level, then we're ending up in this plan kind of world. We do things to make it flexible. Go into that in the other webinar into like a long depth, as well as the long time horizon side. Won't get too much into that on this. But ultimately, at the end of the day, a roadmap is a communication tool. It is a tool to help you communicate the future direction of your product. And that should be based and founded in your strategy. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are going to be focused more on these things. And you'll see how that kind of comes out. So let's get into it. Let's go from laundry list of things to a outcome orientated roadmap, and let's go through the steps. So step one with building a roadmap is whether you have a strategy already. So I kind of just alluded to that. Your roadmap is communicating that future direction of your product. The future direction should be described, and the choices that you make about that should be inside your strategy. Now, not everyone has like a fleshed out strategy, right? Not everyone is in this position where they've got this clear strategy and we're taking the strategy and turning it into a roadmap. If you are in that position, everything I'm going to talk about is still relevant. You're just going to kind of skip 2 and a little bit of 3. So you'll see how that works. But yeah, let's assume you're not in that position, because most people aren't in that position. Most people are kind of in this world where they've got like this big laundry list of things. So this was the position that product manager was in. And this is then the first step, because you don't have a strategy. And I like to call this step "bring out your dead." For any Monty Python fans out there, you would understand that reference. But essentially, what you want to do as a first step, if you don't have a strategy, is you want to just go and gather all the work, right? Like, so what is the team working on? What is the current work on the product? What's the backlog? What's the future work? What is like stakeholder requests? What are things that customers are complaining about? And just gather it all. You want to gather everything, current and future to do with the product. And it doesn't really matter what format you created in, but this was basically the format that the product manager had it. This is not the real thing. I can't show you the real thing because it's got obviously sensitive information inside of it. What I did to create this, if anyone's wondering, is I just jumped into Miro AI, and you can see I was playing around with it just earlier, and I just asked it to create a doc. But basically, their product was an analytics product. So I just asked it, come up with a feature list for an analytics product. I gave it a few other prompts around it. But her list did not look too different than this. It was in a Confluence page, and it was this kind of long list of all these things that they are currently working on and that they need to do. And she did also categorize things just like this doc did as well. She had some things that were like, these are more the immediate things that we need to do. These are the things that we think we need to do next in the next quarter, like short-term things. These were the things that are more like that medium term. And here's like the big bets that, like future, big picture thinking type stuff that she had as well. So very similar format. So what we did was we took that, and that was really, really good. And what we want to do as step 3 or 2, if you don't have a strategy, is we want to try to extrapolate narratives. I like to use the term narratives because a strategy should have narratives inside of it. There should be these little threads, these like little stories that kind of tie everything together and make it more cohesive. So what we did was we basically just went through the list. And as we went through the list, I just asked questions. So as we went through the things in like this near term, I was kind of like, okay, why did you put all these things in the now? Like, what are the reasons for it? And some of the things that she said, these are actual straight copy paste of what we actually did on a Miro board. I had to redact some things because of obviously sensitive information, but these ones are all actual copy and paste post-it notes. So she said things like, well, we're trying to work towards feature parity. There's things that our competitors have that we don't. There's just some, I'll zoom in a bit to make it easier to read. There's some clear functionality gaps. There's, gaps, highly requested things from customers. This specific ask was from a specific customer, and it was like a very obvious pain point that they're dealing with. So like a lot of the things at the start of the list were all focused on, clear gaps, that type of stuff. And as we went down the list, it kind of changed. So then we started to go down. It was like, well, actually all these things are kind of focused on insights. And if I think about, generating insights inside of our product, well, we actually need to break it down into like 1, 2, 3. And that's how she kind of had it broken down. And then as we're going through that, she was like, well, all these other things exist because there's dependencies and there's prerequisites, and we need to flatten the data, and we need to, build a foundation, and we need to do, I prefer that we do this before we do something else. So I was just literally typing it out. And this is what you can do. Just like write out the like verbal like vomit that kind of happens as you go through it. And then as we started to get to the bottom, you started to get to things that were like, well, these things are more big bets. We have low confidence in them. They're very complex. Customers aren't necessarily asking for them, but they can deliver outcomes that they are asking for. This is going to resolve a bunch of problems that we have. But then we also had other things that was like, well, we can't work on these things any sooner because they're very design heavy and we just don't have enough capacity and enough designers at the moment. And we're actually trying to actively hire for those designers. So, we can't, even if we wanted to move those things sooner, we just can't. That's why they're towards the end. So what you end up is like these kind of like pieces of a narrative, right? These are just like little stories and reasons and rationales as to why certain things are in certain chunks, right? There's certain building blocks that exist there. Now, from there, you can start to clean that up. And this was our next iteration on that. We started to, well, what does this start to look like? If we were to sequence some of this, what does it mean? And part of it is like, okay, at the beginning, there's clear gaps. And you'll see why all of this is important. Like we haven't really got to like put in work against any of these yet. And that's very, very important. And you'll see how there's method to the madness. You'll see how this comes together. So there's like clear gaps. We have dependencies. We're trying to build a foundation. And then we have like the big bet stuff. And then our next version of that was this, which was starting to tie things together. And basically, these were like the narratives that we created. We had these 3.5. This was also a narrative. We had like these 3 to 4 clear narratives. Narrative number 1 was, look, we just have some, and I'll zoom in. We just have some really clear gaps that are well known. They're highly requested by customers. We need to address them immediately because we're losing customers, right? From there, we need to start to lay down the foundation towards that vision that we have, that North Star experience. But we don't want to just do that and deliver nothing. We should be delivering what we call small nuggets of gold. We should be delivering some stuff whilst we work towards that kind of big swing. And then in the end, we kind of get to that vision point and we're starting to empower our customers to actually extract the insights that they need through basically this type of features and functionalities. Now, from there, we now have the backbone of a roadmap is what I would refer to this as. We have some elements of logical sequencing, and we have a very clear like why as to why we are doing things in a certain order and what we're trying to achieve. From there, we can now start to add the work to it, right? So we can actually start to add the work. So this is what we started to do. And obviously I had the redacted stuff, but now that we have these 3 narratives and these 3 kind of common, buckets, we can start to map that work to those buckets, right? So what are the stuff that's all clear gaps? What is the foundation stuff, etc.? And we actually ended up having to shuffle some things as we did that. Some of these clear gaps, like this highly requested feature from that big customer of theirs, that moved into the next because if you looked at it, there's a capacity constraint, but then there's also like, we need to spread some of these bets because like there could be a good 3 to 6 months that we're not delivering anything because we're building that foundation, right? So we wanted to spread that across. Equally, we don't want to wait too long to start the foundation. So we move some of the foundational elements early into the now. So there was a little bit more shuffling going on, right? So there's more prioritization happening here, more shuffling happening, but we're really starting to map the work back towards that. And at this point in time, this is a roadmap, right? It's a very basic version of a roadmap. And you could stop here, by the way. You could stop here if you wanted to, but I want to add some more things, and we did add more things, and there's a few reasons for that. And that's just taking this roadmap to go from, this is like I don't know, what would I rate this? A 6 out of 10 roadmap, 7 out of 10 roadmap, maybe a 7, because like a lot of the times you don't have these narratives. Remember, a roadmap has the why, that's the why along here. So maybe I'll bump it up to a 7, but we can make it a 10 out of 10 and I'll explain what we did next. So from there, we've kind of got this semblance of a roadmap. Now we can start to actually add in outcomes and really clean it all up. So this is where we started to get to. So now it's starting to look even more, I guess, fancy, or there's more elements to it. The first thing that we did was we checked ourselves. We asked, how does all of this align back to the business strategy? So we took the main pillars or the things that the focus areas that the business strategy had, and we're like, how well does this map? Now, this step might have or should have already been done if you already had a product strategy. But because we're basically taking the work and doing like a very like V1 product strategy, a very basic version of a product strategy, it was a worthwhile exercise to do here. How much does this actually make sense? Does this actually align? And one of the powerful things that you're starting to create here that for people who haven't had a roadmap like this, it can really change things for you. I know once I started doing things this way, it completely changed the game for me, is I now have a very powerful story that I can tell. I've got these narratives along the top that clearly explain why I've organized things in a certain way. And I can tie those things back to the business strategy. So I can, when I'm talking to stakeholders and I'm trying to get buy-in into my roadmap, and this is the whole influencing conversation, right? How do you become better at influencing? I now have a really like much clearer picture and a clearer way to sell my roadmap, to get people to buy into it, to explain why we're doing certain things, and to explain it in a way that it's like, I'm helping you achieve these goals via these things, and we're sequencing it in this way for these reasons. So big, definitely helps you when it comes to influencing. One other thing to just note here, while we started doing this, we started to be like, are we taking on too much work? So we're asking ourselves, should we cut something here? Now, this is another thing just to do a little bit of a sidebar, but it's a very powerful sidebar, and I think it's worth touching. Great product people don't just prioritize like these yellow sticky notes. That's a very common thing. So when you have a backlog and you're just trying to take that backlog and turn it into a very, plan version of a roadmap that I'm sure a lot of you have seen, that's what you do. You take this backlog, you throw like a rice formula at it or whatever prioritized framework you want to choose. You stack rank it, and then you just put it along a timeline. And it just like, you just basically stack in these things, this laundry list of items along a timeline. Now, when you do that, there's no strategy. It's not strategic at all. There's no cohesion as to why we're doing certain things in a certain order. It's just basically like we just went rice or we went value over effort, and we essentially outsourced strategy and strategic thinking to a prioritization formula, right? Now, product people who think more like this, think more strategic, this is definitely a more senior experienced level, you can actually prioritize, you're starting to prioritize different levers and at different levels. So when we were creating these narratives, we were prioritizing. There's an element of prioritization that's happening at this very top macro level. Like, do we solve those gaps now? Do we spread them across everything? Do we do them later? Do we do this big bet earlier? Like, that's a very macro level of prioritization. When you start to categorize things into themes like that we have here, you can also prioritize at the theme level. So rather than prioritizing these individual stickies against each other's, which is what you often do, and that's why prioritization becomes really, really hard because we don't have strategy, and that's it. That was actually my latest YouTube video topic. But instead, we can prioritize at this like blue kind of like theme level. We can just drop this whole theme altogether, and we can prioritize that against the others. And that's what we were talking about, and she was thinking about. So she was like, you know what? We already have all the strategy covered. We're probably just taking on too much work. Should we just drop it? And that's why I kept it in there, because it's useful to illustrate that. So now the roadmap's gone from like a 7 out of 10 to like an 8.5 out of 10, starting to become, like a 8.5 kind of realm. Now we can make this even better by throwing outcomes onto it. And this is like, I pretty much wouldn't add anything more than this, because this is when a roadmap would potentially become too busy. But what we then did was we looked at this and said, okay, what are the metrics? What are the outcomes that we are driving towards? And let's actually start to throw some, something actually measurable against this. So we divided this in basically two ways. One of them was lag in output metrics that align to the business strategy. So this was our way. So this was more horizontal, but this was basically like, how are these horizontals helping to achieve this business strategy? And what are the things that we're going to measure, even if they are more lag in outputs? What are we going to measure that is going to help us be able to show progress against that, right? Like, what are those things contributing against, right? That's basically what you're asking yourself. How does this contribute against those things? So, as some draft ones, we just had like, retention, customer e-score, that type of stuff. And then we also looked from a vertical perspective. So, we then asked ourselves, well, if these were the things that we're focused on, right? So, we're trying to address all these clear gaps that we know. Why are we trying to address those gaps? What is the problem that is happening here? One of the problems is retention and churn. So ultimately, one of the outcomes we're trying to drive towards there is reducing churn. So like the now column is like focused on reducing churn. And in the next column, because it's more focused on building like these insight features and functionalities and some of those, foundations, it was all focused on improving the stickiness of the product and improving that usage, right? And then like the later we can kind of discuss there too. Now, this is where we ended at the end of 2 hours. Obviously, this is not the final roadmap version, but you can see how we're in a position where you can take that, you can tidy it up and really start to put it into that final roadmap version. Obviously, I can't show you what she came up with because I'll just have to redact so much out of it, but hopefully you can see how you would take that and turn it into something like formal at the end of the day. So that was it. That was the steps that we went through to get there. Keen to get into some questions. Definitely stay on for the questions. You're going to get a lot of value out of contextualizing this. Whilst people are putting questions in, I'll just show you. I did this for fun. I took that last roadmap and I asked Miro's AI to like turn it into just turn it into a doc or something. And actually, this is not too bad. This looks a lot like a strategy doc, by the way, for anyone who hasn't seen one, which is kind of cool, actually. It's like, we can kind of reverse, like basically we've done that, right? Because that's what I said. We're actually doing a bit of a V1 strategy by going through this process because the roadmap should be based on your strategy. So if you want to be strategic, you want to have actually a roadmap that is strategic, you need to have that strategy element on it. And this was really cool to see that you could call this a product strategy even, and it's not too bad from a strategy doc, right? So it had the outcomes, had the alignment to the business strategy, then it had some more implementation details like what are we doing, what's the focus, what's the key initiatives. Yeah, this is for anyone who hasn't seen a strategy doc, this is not too dissimilar from one. Success measures. Yeah, it's actually kind of cool. You can kind of take like you can basically then, I'm just saying that this was cool to see that you could take that and almost be like, hey, AI, turn this into a strategy doc for me. That's not bad either. Some things before I get into questions as well, I mentioned I have a product pathways. I have a new course coming out with product discovery. I've taken a little longer to do this course, but I'm launching it now. The reason why I've taken a bit longer is I've decided to pivot a bit. I'm actually going to run it as a live cohort. If you sign up for the live cohort, you'll actually get access to the self-paced course. So this was going to be only a self-paced course because I only have self-paced courses on product pathways right now, but I'm going to launch it as a cohort based as well. I'm going to run both a Europe time zone and a US time zone. So I'll run 2 cohorts as part of this if I get enough numbers. But if you want to go check that out, go over to product pathways, courses, go to product discovery. That's what that is going to look like. If you want more, and I know Pizza just said sign me up. So Pete's in the product mentorship. If you're in the product mentorship, you will get access to the course. So all the part of the product mentorship includes access to all the self-paced courses, and it also includes access to these cohort-based courses too. Product mentorship includes a bunch of other stuff in there. There's a private community. We run workshops in there. There's coaching, all that type of stuff. It's created a huge amount of impact. So yeah, Pete, you'll be able to jump into it anyways. But it's worth looking at. Product mentorship's only a little bit more. You'll get heaps more value out of it. Oh, one other thing to mention on this launch thing. I'm doing a launch bonus. So the launch bonus includes the self-paced course, but it also is going to include a 1-hour coaching session with me. So we'll be able to go through anything you want, probably discovery related because you signed up for that course. But if you wanted to chat about this, I mean, I'm totally open for it. It's times your own. It's basically how I see that. But yeah, so go check that out. Cool. So Damon asked, my coffee's going to go cold. I thought I'd have more time to have my coffee. But then like I ended up doing some stuff and prepping for this. And then I was like, oh shit, like I need to start this webinar. So sorry. So Damon asked, Ant, do you ever use the Kano model? Any views on what it's good for and when it's not to use and when not to use it? So I love the Kano model. Actually came up in a coaching session like earlier in the week. We talked about the Kano model. The thing with the Kano model is it's really, so for those who don't know the Kano model, let me just, the advantage of being online is that I can just do stuff like this and just pull up stuff on the internet. Oh, that picture was terrible. I'll just show you my Google share. I was trying to pull up like a better, like a bigger picture so you could see, but this is probably enough. So this is the Kano model. The Kano model is really for categorization of features is what it's actually for. So it's basically, a way to think about a customer jobs and their needs, and then think about solutions to those needs in kind of these buckets, right? Where we have like this must-do bucket of things we have to do. We have most stuff fall into performance, which is basically, this one actually has different names on it. I'll use this one. Yeah. So most things are kind of like customers aren't happy when we first release it, and over time we make it better and better and better, and it kind of follows this linear line. So it's performance features. Then you've got delighters, which are like things that just surprise customers and are nice from the get-go. It's a really good feature categorization. It's not a bad way to come up with themes. It's not a bad way to think about prioritization. Like, how am I prioritizing the must-haves? Because we have to have them. They're like table stakes. What things are delighters that are often the things. So the reason why this came up in a coaching session earlier in the week is the delighters are often the things that we don't prioritize because they don't really have like this very clear return on investment. They're usually like, low utility and that type of stuff. So you often don't prioritize them, but they're often things that you should do. So how do you just make sure you've got like balanced and you're balancing those things against each other? So that's how I use it and I think about it, and it's good as prioritization. I think it's a really, really good model. What it's not great for is a lot of people use it as a prioritization model. It's a mental model to think about prioritization, but it's not a prioritization framework in itself. Like it only helps you prioritize in the sense that it helps you go, oh, the must-haves I probably should do sooner. But it's not going to help you, it doesn't help you prioritize in the sense of like, oh, you have to do X amount of delighters or something like that. So that's it. I would also say it works really well when there's clear customer jobs. It works probably better on more user-facing stuff. Very hard to do in more, regulatory or stuff that you have to do type spaces, but it still kind of works. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question on that one. So what is the best way to measure the delighters to bring them into the roadmap more for clients/stakeholders? So this was the conversation we had. So it is hard because the nature of delighters is that it is not something that there's like a clear problem to solve, right? There's not. If you think about most of the delighters that you've had in the past with products, they've been like surprises. They've been like, oh, that's nice. It's like a cherry on top. It's not like the core thing. It's not always the reason why it's generally not the reason why you move and use that product on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that makes you stick with the product. It's something that makes you like the product. It's something that makes you tell your friends about the product and maybe even, post on social media. So as a result of that, a lot of the tail end of delighters is often much more lagging, and it takes longer to even be able to realize the benefit of those things. It's also something that is much more of a hypothesis and a bet than something that you can like really well prove. The way to help rationalize your delighters on your roadmap, two things that I've done in the past, I've probably done more, but two things that we talked about the other day. This was literally like Tuesday or something in the week, so it was very, very fresh. We talked about two things. So one of them is strategy. So one of them is those narratives. So one of your narratives could be to delight customers, to have moments of delight in the process. And that could be something as a strategy you choose to do. So strategy is a set of choices, and you could choose to actually invest into delighters. That is something that you can do. Now, that works well in companies where we value delighters, we understand strategy, and you can talk about that. Now, The other thing that you can do is you can find examples. So they actually had an example of where another product in the company did a delighter, and it's became like this really viral thing. So what we talked about was, can you use that as a story to say, well, we need to do something, at least something. Like, can we do 5% of our time? Is like, we're not talking, this isn't like stop everything and only work on delighters. Like, we're talking about like 5% of our capacity or something like that. It's going to be delighters, or 10%. And to use that as a story to tell that story, to be like, well, remember that, like, we want to do something similar, because think about remember all the downstream impacts and effects that we got from that. We want that. So that's another thing that you can kind of package up. But another thing that you can do is just to try to get some signals early on around that. So some of the things you can do around your delighters is you can do prototypes, you can test them, you can see how they resonate really early. Hopefully you can do that in a way that you don't need to ask for permission for that. And then when you start to get some evidence around that, you can then use that evidence to then, rationalize it. Like, well, this did really, really well. Everyone, was amazed at this. Yes, it wasn't like, we're going to make an extra $5 per user per sign up or something, but it's something that, really resonated, and I can use that more qualitative. That's what you end up leveraging, not quantitative. You end up leveraging much more qualitative data and inputs to rationalize actually doing it. So hopefully that helps, but they are hard. That's why it's hard, because it's hard to actually go, what is the quantitative benefits of this? Well, I don't actually know. It's very hard. And some delighters, they didn't even think that there was going to be as big of a benefit than that they actually got, right? Sometimes it's just like a surprise, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe this went really, really viral, right? So you have to leverage or anchor and use qualitative much more. So Daniel asks, would you have any advice for getting buy-in for moving from more plan-orientated roadmaps to outcome-focused roadmaps like I've outlined? I could create the outcome roadmap like you outlined, but I would fully anticipate questions like what date exactly is next? I can't read this morning either, apparently. So my advice on this, I talk about this in that webinar as well. I'll touch on it very quickly. You can watch some of that if you want. My advice is to find a middle ground. So let me actually pull this back up and let's sketch a little bit. So if we look at the now, next, later, you can, I won't copy it, I'll just do it on top. You can start to create broader time horizons without being specific on the when, and by still taking the uncertainty into account. So one of the things that you can do is you can say, well, this is like next quarter. So what are we in, like we're kind of Q3 right now already. So you can be like, this is Q3. So I haven't said like it's September or August. I'm just like quarter. It's like a bucket, right? And this is also you testing the waters of like what level of fidelity is okay for my company and my stakeholders. Like, I want to know that it's going to go out at 3:41 p.m. on the 17th of September, 2025. Like, do they want that level of detail, or are they comfortable with now, next, later? Like, and then there's varying degrees in between. So I would just take one step closer and see how that works, and then slowly take steps closer. So one of the steps you can do is like, okay, let's say this is this quarter. You could probably have another bucket that's like the next quarter if you wanted to. But then what I'd be doing is I'll be like, this is the first half of 2026. So now I'm going from quarters to like 6 months bucket. And then I might have like a second quarter. I could do that if I wanted to, 2026. And then I would have like another bucket that would be like 2027 plus beyond, right? And this allows you to put stuff in the later that's probably in these buckets. That's like, I don't know when it is next, like 2027 or something. Like, I don't know. Like, is it January? Is it December? Is it 2028? Would we even do it? Who knows? But, as long as we can be comfortable with that kind of broad time horizon out there and a closer time horizon here, this is where I would start, trying to just bring it back a little bit to make them a little bit more comfortable. The other thing that you can do is you can pair your roadmap with a plan. So you should be planning in the near term. So stuff in the quarter, like you probably do quarterly planning, right? So you could have a plan for the quarter that says these things are going, we think that we can get these things done by these kind of dates. And you can give that to them to make them happy. The part that you need to negotiate and really, find, how do we not how do we not end up in a position where I'm promising something 12 months from now on a specific date is more that. So the stuff that ends up out here, that's where planning's just going to fall apart. It's just not going to work. So that's where I would be fighting. And then the stuff here, I'd be like, okay, I could probably, we could do a quarterly plan as a team and give them some indicative dates. Hopefully these time horizons are okay. But if they're asking like, when is this going to be? Is it going to be like September 2026? Like, I don't know. And like, no, I'm not going to tell you. Like, let's have that discussion. So hopefully that helps. So working as a product trio, in that example, in that scenario, that was the product manager and myself doing a coaching session together. Now, outside of that, you would definitely work as a product trio to do that together. And that was one of my recommendations. And she was going to do it anyways. Like she's a good product manager. To begin with, the feature list that she came up with, that was done as a product trio. So that wasn't her making it up. They did that as a trio. Her and I did the coaching session together to go from that feature list to that draft roadmap. But then she would take that, she would go back to the trio, walk them through it, refine it. And that's what she did. And then she did a draft. She presented it to her manager and her stakeholders, got some feedback, and iterated from there. So absolutely work as a product trio. This is not meant to be go hide in a box and do that. Precy asked, are outcomes lead-in metrics? As I see, there are some lag-in metrics. Outcomes can really be lead-in or lag-in. They can be both. We had both on that roadmap. The reason why we put both on is we wanted to have more lead-in outcomes for like the work. And maybe I'll even just pull this up for a second, actually, because this is actually worth touching on. We wanted to have lag-in outcomes that could help us. Where's my pen? We wanted to have lag-in outcomes that could help us talk to stakeholders and align it back to basically how we impacting that side of the fence. So if you think about it, you can think about like, how is the change in user behavior driving a product outcome? And how is that product outcome driving a business kind of outcome? Oh, look at all of us in here. That's lovely. I don't feel so alone anymore. So that's kind of like how we're thinking about it. And now, so these are more lagging things starting to head towards, business kind of outcomes or lagging business outcomes. And then you'll have more product outcomes at like this level. And then the more lower level stuff, you would still have individual metrics and measures of success at these different ticket items, right? So if I was to release this feature, I would still want to have a way to measure the success of it, right? Like it shouldn't be like just release it and then we just hope that, these other metrics move. So you should have a spread of all of them, in other words. And that's how that would work together. Could you comment on the level of detail that you would go into for the items on your roadmap? For example, would you have a PRD for each sticky note or add a theme at a time? So at this level, let me just pull this one back up. The level of detail will change. We're kind of just talking about it, answering Brad's comments. So maybe you thought about this. Basically, the level of detail is going to change. The things out here are going to be far less detail. These are going to be more potentially even one-liners. They could be things like international expansion, right? Like we want to move internationally. They could be like, so that's really, really high level. The next level of detail would be like, we want to expand in Europe first. The next level of detail could be like Germany first, right? Next level of detail could be, actually all of the details that you need in order to launch in Germany. So that would be like, we need to support German, we need to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So is it necessary to get to that level of detail if it's something that's going to be like 12, 24 months away? That's kind of the question you're asking yourself. And in most cases, the answer is no. So we can leave it at that, like, Europe, and we can work it out at the time. And then as things get closer in time horizon, we would break that down. So I talked about this in that other webinar, but just to answer this question. So you would go from international expansion to like, okay, it's getting closer and we're thinking Europe. Okay, it's getting closer and, because you're doing continuous discovery, right? And you should be refining your strategy and you should be refining where you're going and what you're doing. So you would be refining it over time. You just wouldn't be allocating your effort to that if it's so far in the future. Because me going and doing all that discovery to work out, is it Germany? Is it Denmark? Is it, whatever? it's not worth it if it's like 2 years from now, because so much can change. Like just look at like, tariffs and like stuff that's happening in the world, right? So you don't want to allocate your energy there. You want to allocate your energy over here. So keep it as a one-liner. And as things get closer, you will start to allocate energy to it and more energy, and you'll start to break it down. Then you'll get to the point where the things in the now are probably down at like these poster nodes could have individual specs and like user stories and like however you want to work. They could have, that level of detail at this level. These will start to be, maybe a sentence or two. These will be like one-liners. That's kind of where you would go with that. You could have like at the theme level if it made sense, but you'll probably be speccing these things out. Yeah, that's what you'll be doing. You might have like a little bit of a description on what this like capability is or something like that. Yeah. Okay, so Martin asked, is your experience with working with outcome-based roadmaps that the need for prioritization via WSGIF, which is it's basically weighted shortest job first is what it stands for. It's a combination of like weighted scorecarding and cost of delay. It's a variation of cost of delay, or whatever tool you use becomes less or not needed. Here's the thing. The difference here is strategy. So if you don't have a strategy, you have to start to use those types of tools because you don't have anything to anchor yourself against in terms of prioritization. So I talk about it in the video. I quote John Cotler. He had this really good tweet that basically said, without a strategy, all you're left with is a ton of good ideas and no way to prioritize them. So that's what happens in these worlds where we don't have product strategy. We don't have, these choices that help drive us forwards. Now, when you have those things, those tools become less needed because we have a clear, like, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we've got clear choices that we've made. So that's what ends up happening. That video, 15 minutes, I talk about it in a little bit more depth. I hopefully show the pictures kind of coming together for you. But yeah, that's why it becomes less necessary. Not necessarily the process, it's the fact that we're being strategic. Strategy makes those tools less needed. Not to say that they're not needed at all. They're still very useful tools, but useful in kind of like the right pockets. And maybe the last thing I'll say on this one is that when you don't have strategy and you're doing these things, the way that I think about it is you're essentially outsourcing your product strategy to WSGIF or Rice or whatever tool you're using. And whilst those tools are good, that's not a good product strategy. You're going to get beat by your competitors is probably how I would say that. Okay, this is a cool question because it's not that common you run into this. So Beth asked, what type of roadmap would be best for a product that's going to be sunset? We have to do a few more enhancements and then it will be sunsetted and replaced with something else. So great question. Some of this would depend on context. So I have sunsetted products before. When you start to get very close to sunset and date and you actually have like a clear day to sunset, this is where timelines and a bit more rigor around time horizons does become necessary. But this is because you start to blur the lines between essentially roadmap and planning, because now you're starting to get into sunset planning, if that makes sense. So you'll have some more semblance of a timeline. Some roadmaps, I don't really think there's like a best one, to be honest. And now, next, later would still work perfectly fine. You might just not have the later. You might just have like now and next. Like these are the things we're doing now. These are the things we'll do next, and then we're going to sunset the product, right? Like it might just be that. Other ones could be like doing it by release. So like these are the releases that we're going to do. We're going to drop these things in each of these releases, and then we're going to sunset after this release. That's good as well because you can keep dates away from that. So you can talk about functionality in a release without necessarily going down into the date thing. If you do watch that webinar I shared about product roadmaps, I do go through a bunch of different formats in there. In fact, I'd probably encourage you, this is very coachy of me, but I would say go look at that. Go look at the different formats. You can just fast forward to that part of the video if you don't want to watch the whole thing. I won't take offense to it. Maybe a little bit, not joking. So go just have a look. There's like 8 different formats in there. Get some inspiration. Think about your context. and then think about which one of them resonates the most. And then like ask yourself, why did that resonate the most? And then if it's logical, go with that one. But that's probably what I'd go there. So Russell asked, how are we dealing with this is basically just fucking do it tasks is basically what he means here. We aren't really dealing with them when we're talking about this because we're trying to build a roadmap together, in particular, a strategic outcome roadmap. Now, some of those things are going to come in and we're going to have to manage them at basically an individual level. But here's what I will say, and I'll share again. When you're at this level, it becomes easier. It doesn't solve the problem. I'm not trying to claim that it does. This is nowhere near a silver bullet, but it does become easier to fight back against some of those things that don't make sense. Because now you have outcomes, you have a clear narrative around it, and you have like themes that are tied back to like a business strategy. And if that task that, the founder is just coming in and saying, or whoever, right? To be honest, I think founders and stuff, there is an element of like executive overriding that is somewhat allowed. It's not the best, but like, let's just be real. It's their company. And especially for the ones that are like, self-funding it or something like that, like it's kind of like their money and their place. They have an element of a right to do that. You still want to have a conversation about it. You still want to make sure that it makes sense and you want to challenge it and you want to be able to have an environment that allows you to do that. But there is an element that it's like, well, it's his company, not your company or her company, right? So yeah, there's that. But what I'm saying is this helps because we can then say, okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but we just really need to fix all these, like if we go back to like this near-term narrative, right? Like we really need to fix these gaps because these gaps are costing us X amount of money. We're losing customers. It's painful. Look at all these customers requesting it. Like we just need to fix that. So you telling me that your thing is more important than fixing this problem because I don't think it is. So rather than us arguing about the thing, let's argue about what problem we're trying to solve. Is actually addressing some of these gaps more or less important? And then if we agree on that, then we can get to the next level of detail and we can start to dissect that. And maybe they say, well, can we move, you're at that. They might say like, can we move that into next and then fit some space so we can fit that thing that we're asking for in? Okay, cool. Let's negotiate. Let's have that conversation. It just makes it, more easier. That's what I'll say at that. But you're not trying to really deal with that as a like a specific individual thing because that's not what you're trying to achieve here. Sophie asking, any specific ways of doing this if you had a user story map? Yes. So user story map would essentially be your bring out your dead thing, right? Like that's like your backlog and all the work that you need to do. So if you've already got a user story map, excellent. That's step 2/1. Awesome. What I would then do is basically go through that process that we just did. Now, that might mean that you drift away from your user story map and then kind of come back to it later afterwards. But that's how I would do it. Another thing you could consider is when we're doing, and I'll just go back to Sharon, just doing so much back and forth here, but I'm a visual person and hopefully the visuals help. So hopefully this helps you, Sophie. So if you're doing these narratives with a user story map, something that you can do, I'm going to have to draw this and then delete it for Friday's group. If you've got, so imagine you've got like your user story, like this is like your backbone along the top with those things. Terrible drawing. I'm trying to draw fast. Then you've got like all your stories going down this way. What you could do is you could draw lines, right? And organize these into those narratives. So you could have like narrative 1, narrative 2, narrative 3, or whatever, and then just move the stuff around into those narratives. That is a way that you can basically do those steps and keep it all on the story map. And then you might need to move away from the story map as you start to build the roadmap, but you could kind of keep it together and just group things like that. That would be another thing to think about or consider. But story map to me is just really that step. And then so that's this step. And then you would have to come up with narratives, start to sequence them, start to build a roadmap from there. Well, we are at time. I'm going to call it there. Sophie, I just read one of the best webinars I have attended, and that means so much to me, and I'm glad about it. So yeah, awesome. Have a good day wherever you are. And Mirko, I'll see you soon because we got some coaching stuff. But yeah, anyways, I'll see you all later.